Hello, fellow homebrewers. JP here, and I want to introduce to you the brand new Brew-Built X1 Conical Series available at More Beer. More Beer sells the highest standard in homebrewing equipment, and the Brew-Built Conicals are just that. They're made from mirror-polished 304 stainless steel, and they come with loads of features that you and I have been looking for. They have a full 2-inch bottom dump valve, which will eliminate your clogging issues, while the sturdy base includes 4 reinforced legs, just like those big pro tanks do. More Beer also carries the Brew-Built line of options and add-ons like casters, pressure kits, and even external glycol chillers. So you can find out more about the new Brew-Built X1 Conical Unitanks by going over to morebeer.com for detailed videos on the entire line of Brew-Built Conicals. You can trust Brew-Built with your next fermentation, and you can trust More Beer to find the right conical for you. Brew-Built at morebeer.com.
The land down under has never been easier to reach. United Airlines has more flights between the U.S. and Australia than any other U.S. airline, so you can fly nonstop to destinations like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Explore dazzling cities, savor the very best of Aussie cuisine, and get up close and personal with the wildlife. Who doesn't want to hold a koala? Go to united.com/Australia to book your adventure.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session. I'm your host, Justin Crosley, back again with an interview that I've been wanting to do for years and somehow have never quite put it together. Me and my guests see each other in passing at probably every beer event on the planet that we attend together and have never quite put this together, so I'm really excited that we've finally done it. From the Brewers Association, I have Bart Watson, the chief economist from the Brewers Association. Welcome to the show, Bart.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a long time coming. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, like I said, I'm happy to have you. And, you know, I don't consider myself, this is an understatement, I don't consider myself a numbers guy. In fact, I'm almost allergic to them. But I have seen you speak so many times at the Great American Beer Festival, at the Craft Brewers Conference, and it's always so compelling. Like, you just have a way of speaking about numbers that is so palatable for people like me. And I'm sure you can make it palatable for people who are numbers people as well. But I just really like the way you present. So that's why I've always wanted you on the show, and I'm happy to have you.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I always think of numbers as a part of the story, and maybe that's a difference, right? You're not just telling people the numbers, you're trying to tell people the story. And, you know, the numbers are the character. They're the illustration that helps you do that and adds validity to that story. So maybe that's one of those things that differentiates me. But I get that comment a lot. Like, I don't like numbers. I don't like economists, but I can listen to you speak. So I'll take that as a positive.
As you should. It's a bit of it's almost a backhanded compliment, isn't it? But it's a compliment nonetheless.
Yeah.
All right. I want to thank our sponsor real quick, More Beer. They've been sponsoring this show since the beginning, way back in 2005. So thanks to More Beer. Go over to morebeer.com. Check it out. You can get everything that you need for both home brewing and professional brewing. Check it out at morebeer.com. All right, Bart. So, you know, part of the impetus of this show was that you just put out the Brewers Association mid-year report, which obviously is a big part of your job, is to kind of let your membership at the Brewers Association know what's happening. And we're going to talk about that. But before we dive in, I just want to know a little bit about you, you know, your education background and how, not only how you got into becoming an economist, but becoming an economist specifically for the beer world. If you can tell me just to, you know, go back a little bit about your life there.
Yeah, it's certainly a little bit of a circuitous story. I didn't plan to be in the beer world. I planned to be an academic. So I went and I got my PhD. I got a PhD studying political economy at the University of California, Berkeley. So, and definitely lingered over pints many times at some of the fine breweries there, Triple Rock and Jupiter and some of the ones near the Berkeley campus.
Oh, yeah.
And I was planning to be a professor, and I actually was teaching at the University of Iowa, teaching a health policy course amongst midst of other courses, and was looking for data on excise taxes because part of health policy, public policy is related to excise taxes, and found the Brewers Association site, and they were looking for an economist. And the job description really sounded like something that would mesh with what I do, what I'm interested in. I've always studied parts of the economy that I think are, not brewing, but related to brewing, distribution, retail. And so I applied, and after a long process, got the job. And I'll admit, I was still wavering. I'd always thought of myself as an academic first and foremost. So was I going to leave and go to Boulder? And my wife, who's clearly much smarter than me, kind of smacked me over the head and was like, "It's beer, it's Boulder, you should take it. Let's go."
Right.
And the rest is history.
Excellent. And, you get to travel because of it. So it does sound like, I don't want to say it's not a cushy gig, but it's a great gig for an economist, I would think.
Yeah, it's amazing too, to really get deep into one product, to really understand it. I mean, travel's a part of that. We were visiting breweries in Baltimore this week, and they were saying thanks for coming in. And I was thanking them for giving me some of their story. I mean, you can see the numbers, but until you really understand the stories beneath them, they don't come to life. So yeah. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy getting out there, and it's amazing too, working for all these entrepreneurs, all these small businesses across the country.
Oh, for sure. And I can relate to that. Over the years, the favorite part of my job and my interviews is no longer the beer, to be honest. I mean, I love the beer. But it's the stories. It's what people have. It's their lives and how they got to where they are. When did you start at the Brewers Association?
I started in 2013, so I'm in year 11 now.
Okay.
Had my 11th anniversary earlier this spring.
Okay. And what I can see, that really fits the curve of craft beer, and I can see why the Brewers Association decided, hey, we really need this position now. It was such an explosive amount of growth by that time that if we weren't capturing the data, we're really missing out on something.
Yeah, at the time, my boss, Paul Gatza, was still doing all of our numbers. And I think Paul had realized that it was, he was very good. He's a very quantitative-minded person. But I think he had realized it was time to bring in somebody who had studied this, knew how to do this, both from just our data and tracking side, also our government affairs side. That's when we had really started working on our tax bill, at that point called the Small Brew Act, later turned into the Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act, which is now law. But we were doing a lot in government affairs around that time, around economic impact, and really telling that story about craft beer, all it does for the economy. And so those two things together meant it was time for an economist. And I think it was a great match. And that we had 2,000 breweries in the country now. I've gotten to see the ride up to close to 10.
Yeah.
And it's been a great place to be.
Excellent. Okay, so obviously a big part of your job is to assess the industry as a whole, and I think that's your goal with the mid-year report, right? To kind of take a look at everything and be able to boil it down for us.
Yeah, we're hopefully doing touch points for members throughout the year.
Okay.
We want to be providing insights, helping members think about their business, not just a couple times a year, but throughout the year. But we do two bigger looks into the market. The first is our annual survey, which is the most comprehensive and in-depth. And we take all that data, we publish it in our magazine. We do a big presentation at the Craft Brewers Conference. And this one's a little bit more of a snapshot, where we do a survey, though it's not quite as comprehensive as our annual one. And along with that, we pull together as much data as we can from SCAN, from tax data, from talking to members, to give a little bit of that mid-year update. And really this is more of a finger of the wind of, we have a big comprehensive look for full year with our beer industry production survey. And at mid-year, what we're trying to do is understand, has that changed dramatically? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Are we seeing things that are fundamentally different than they were, 6 months ago?
Okay. All right. Good to know. And let's dive into some of those numbers. And, I think I'll kind of start with what I see and hear in the industry. The thing that people like to report on the most right now is brewery closures. And so it can almost feel like we're seeing this mass exodus of craft breweries if you pay attention to those headlines. But that's not exactly what your report says at all.
Yeah, and I think with all of these things, context is important. And I think what we're seeing right now, and I try to, do both. Talk about the reality of what we're seeing right now, but also put it in some wider context, is we're not in that double-digit growth period that we were. Things were golden and rosy, and I think for a lot of people that kind of got burned into their head is what's normal. That's the baseline for expectation. And so when you look at it that way, what's happening right now seems horrible. It seems disastrous. And I think we can reframe that around that 10-year period where we grew double digits all the time, everyone opened and no one closed. That's the unusual thing. You don't see that in most markets.
Yeah.
And what we're in now, maybe isn't going to be the long-term normal, right? You're going to see variations, but it's a little bit more of a quote unquote normal market. And so, closings, we can start there. Closings have gone up, but they're still way below a lot of other industries. We're going to see probably 4 to 5% of the breweries in the country close this year. And that's hard. That's it's higher than it was. That's still way lower than, say, overall hospitality, where 8 to 10% of the businesses close every year. So that's part of what, we try to do with these reports, is not just give the numbers with, craft down now a couple of points, but give the context that, down a couple of points, over time is what you'd expect for a lot of industries, where sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down, and very few industries can go up and up and up and up forever. And that's just, the way things are going to be.
So with that, then it seems clear to me that you maybe even anticipated this, because it's more of a normal thing to happen. Maybe you didn't anticipate when, but if I were to ask you 10 years ago, you might have told me this is not going to go on forever.
Yeah, 100%. Things have life cycles, growth life cycles. They have points of, equilibrium and maturation. And, if you've heard me talk anytime in the last 5 to 10 years, it was pretty clear to me at one point that, the ride would have to end at some point. Yeah. And, maybe I could have said that louder, but on closings, for example, I've stood on stage for 5+ years and said, I'm shocked closings aren't higher.
Right.
And they have to go up at some point because, just business dynamics tell us that you can't just have people constantly moving into a space and have no one go out of business. That's just not, running a small business is hard, and running a small business in a space that isn't growing anymore, just naturally that pie is going to get sliced up more and more, and some people are going to go out of business. So
right.
I've been trying as much as possible. Forecasting's hard, so knowing when, knowing how much is difficult. But that's part of my role as much as possible, is to give members, what's the 5 to 10 year outlook, and right now my message there would be, we're in a period where don't expect it to go back to 18% growth, because we're in a more mature place where that doesn't mean there's not growth opportunity. That doesn't mean new businesses can't open. That doesn't mean your business can't be successful, but it's a different competitive environment than it was when we were growing double digits and the category was growing gangbusters and everybody was adding, products and shelf sets and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. You don't have to name any names, but are there breweries that you know of personally that heeded those warnings of that commentary and prepared for this type of market, by expanding their outreach or their distribution model or whatever it may be? Do you know of any that kind of went, you know what, we're going to prep for this?
I think there were some that did, and many of them were ones who, I don't know that they were heeding my advice, but had been through this before. You talk to breweries who had been through this in the late 90s, early 2000s, because this isn't the first time craft grew like crazy and then leveled off.
Right.
We had this happen in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so, you talk to breweries who were, around for that. And I think many of them, maybe I was saying it, but having that experience, taught them,
sure.
A little bit more, kind of what was coming. And, so it's the breweries who, maybe in contrast to what you just said, didn't expand that distribution, said, hey, maybe we shouldn't be in these markets that far afield and we should keep it a little bit tighter. And that gives us levers to pull if and when growth slows, right? We can always go to that market later. And if we don't now, maybe that sets us up for a little bit more success. So I think of a brewery like Allagash. They're a great example that, they were in more states before than they are now.
Okay.
After that slowdown the last time, they pulled back, they concentrated their markets, and they very consciously never went back out. They took that lesson and they said, this is going to slow down again. We know it's going to.
Yeah.
And so being in kind of a more concentrated set of markets where we can defend our territory is going to be better for us long run. And, I think they're an example of a brewery that I'm sure they're not posting the growth numbers today that they were before, but, is still a healthy, thriving business and on good footing, even in this more mature market.
Okay. Got it. So, and let's talk about the kind of the growth versus, maybe a bit stagnant. Interestingly to me, your numbers of breweries reporting growth about matches my anecdotal experience with interviews. And that is, when people ask me how the industry is doing, if breweries can still make it, my answer is usually that about 50% of the breweries I know are growing, and the others are either not only not growing, but almost, but can be failing, right? And
yeah,
I think your survey showed that in the first part of the year, about 54% of breweries reported they're growing, right?
Yeah.
And growth is volume or sales dollars? What are we looking at?
That was in volume. So in sales dollars, hopefully more would be growing if we were looking at revenue. And you've raised a great point, which I also try to stress when I present these numbers in context, which is averages lie, or they don't really lie, but they hide that variation. So an average is telling us where the center of the market is. You do the same things with a mean or any other measure of central tendency. And sometimes what matters too is how that distributes across the breweries. And in a static market, one that's not growing, we're actually shrinking slightly. So a slightly decreasing market, not everyone can win. That's just, that's just how it works. But you can still have winners. That just means they're taking from somewhere else, right? So if that pie is not growing, you can have people who are getting a slightly bigger slice, and that means it's impacting somebody else. And I think that's what we're going to see over the next couple of years. Is there's plenty of breweries that are still doing things successfully because they're doing one of a few things. They're growing the market in some way, right? Reaching out to somebody new who has not been a part of the craft market. They're outperforming, somebody else in some way. And so they're actively taking share, or they're just, they're taking from some other part of the beverage alcohol industry. And those are the people who are going to be able to grow, right? Because they're doing something better. They're marketing and branding better. They're connecting with, better product. They're doing something that differentiates them. And you're going to have the balance of that, which is the people they're taking the share from, or the places the market is shrinking.
Okay. So let's talk about that kind of share too, on the whole. Again, anecdotally, my experience in running my tap room, and we're just craft beer and seltzer. It's all I'm allowed to sell. And we have seen a dramatic decline in sales. We're still making it, but if I were to show you the numbers, you might go, yeah, that's exactly what we've seen happening. And that's what I'm curious about, is the broader consumer market. Because on one hand, I think it was I'm forgetting the other trade name, the other beer industry's report said that the majority of people surveyed drink beer over any other beverage. And that, to me, isn't really reflective of what I'm seeing. If you were to ask me, hey, Justin, what do you think about beer drinking in America right now? I'd say, man, it's down quite a bit. Do people not like beer anymore? I'd be asking you those questions. So what do you think about that broader beer consumer market?
Yeah, I think it's down, and remember too, you can spin stats in lots of ways. So my job is not the numbers spinner, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not on the promote side. I'm on the cold hard facts, tell our brewers how it is. And so you can imagine a world, right, where 70% of people said they drank beer, and now it's 51%. I could still say, hey, a majority of people say beer is their preferred beverage, and that's still down sharply from where it was before. And I think we're seeing a couple of things. One is beer has been in a long-term per capita consumption decline, and craft was largely immune to that, because what we were seeing over a long period of time was people were drinking a little bit less beer, but they were trading up in the beer market. They were drinking better, for lack of a better term. Right. But they were drinking more imports. They were drinking more craft. They were drinking things that were priced a little bit higher. And at a certain point, that beer infrastructure though shrinks to a place where craft can't benefit anymore. So I think that's part of what's going on. I think we're also just seeing that craft is losing a little bit in that occasions battle. Beverage alcohol consumption has been remarkably consistent for the last, let's say, 20 years amongst Americans. The average American drinks about the same amount, and so if something else goes up, something else has to go down. And for a long time, craft was the thing going up. It was taking occasions where people had drunk wine before, they had drunk spirits before, they drunk mostly. A lot of this was coming from light beer before, and now craft is starting to see that flow that was inward. Big chunks of it are going outward. That people are drinking ready to drink cocktails. They're drinking spirits. They're drinking. For a minute it was hard seltzer, now it's FMBs and all sorts of other stuff. And what we've seen in our consumer survey is that's not, a huge outflow, but it's a much more kind of balanced number than it once was. Okay. And that's different. And, one last thing I'll say too, is the experience is going to vary by place and by customer base. Yeah. So you're going to see some places where where, if I went into the right bar right now in the country and asked them how their craft sales are doing, they might say it's booming.
Right.
But that's not the typical experience. And where we're seeing kind of craft get hit the hardest is often the places it was most developed first, because those are the people who they're into flavor, they're into variety. And that's what you have out there in the beverage alcohol market today. So
you're right. Yeah.
Suddenly there's a lot of choices, there's a lot of flavor. And those kind of early craft customers who are in markets that were a little bit more developed are now kind of the ones who have moved on first. And so you're seeing kind of more challenges in those types of markets.
Such an excellent point, and makes me feel better to hear you say it, Bart, because, when people ask me too, why do you think the hop grenade doesn't do as well? My first response is, how long do you have? Because it's so many, I always just define it as like the perfect storm. But one of those very things is when I opened the hop grenade here, I was one of only maybe two great beer spots in the East Bay, the greater East Bay area where I'm at. And now there's 5 different ones, and including a Yard House, who it boggles my mind how that's still a popular venue, but that is a consumer trend that's come back. And the Yard House in my area on a Wednesday night is full. It's full when we're not. And so a lot of it does just have to do with nothing to do with alcohol and more to do with consumer behavior in general.
Yeah, and we haven't even touched on, some of the economic stuff. I mean, certainly too, how people are feeling about the economy, how much money they have, the inflation we've seen in recent years often means that, maybe people are spending as much money as they did before, but now because it doesn't go as far, they're going out a little bit less. So there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. And another one is consumers themselves. They change over time. And so, craft is typically done, really well from 25 to 44. Those people are aging, maybe they're looking for different occasions, they're looking for different beverages. And I think one of the big challenges for craft that we see too is we're not seeing that next generation move in to quite the same extent. It's not to say they don't drink craft. Anybody who tells you, Gen Z doesn't drink, they never go out, like that's overblown, that's too far. But only takes, 5% change in a generation's behavior before suddenly you've got, big shifts for a business like yours where, if you're not replacing the people who are moving out with new people who are moving in, that's a real challenge.
Absolutely. I want to hone in a little bit on what you just said about, the new generation not drinking. And so a couple years ago, I saw you speak at the Great American Beer Festival, and you made a comment that surprised me because the narrative at the time, and I'm sure this is why you brought it up, was the problem is that people aren't drinking as much anymore. And I'm going to paraphrase, but you essentially said, people are not drinking any more or less than they ever have. Like the difference is minimal from a numbers perspective. It's not even something we would put a figure on because it's almost irrelevant. And that really surprised me because it was part of my own narrative. Hey, one of our problems is that these new kids aren't drinking, and you basically said it's really not a measurable difference from any generation.
Yeah, and I will say that's just changed a little bit. So,
okay.
we got to update our beliefs when we get new data. And, I would say now is the next generation coming online, so 21 to 25-year-olds, they drink and spend a little bit less on beverage alcohol than previous generations.
Okay.
Now, we saw some of that with the last group who came through. And by the time they were 30, they were right back to the averages. So one of these slides I've been putting in my deck right now is I think the most interesting question in beverage alcohol that I can't answer, but is somebody who turns 21 today, I can tell you on average, they're probably less likely to drink than 21-year-olds 10 years or 20 years ago. And they're going to spend a little bit less on beverage alcohol than 21-year-olds did 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay.
What I really want to know is what they're going to do when they're 30, because part of what we've seen is that underage drinking in this country has dropped, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
So like high school seniors on surveys, much less likely to have drunk in the last 30 days or last year or ever. And that just means that when they come of age as 21, they have less experience in beverage alcohol. So it may just take them a little bit more time to move into the market. But I think it is becoming clear that generation's, at least as they start, is drinking a little bit less. You can see this on consumer expenditure surveys. That said, you can overblow it, right?
Yeah.
So, I saw a headline the other day, 40% of Gen Z doesn't drink. Well, 2/3 of Americans, if you look at the Gallup poll over years, 2/3 of Americans drink, which means a third don't drink. So 33%, when you say the headline, like 40% don't drink versus 33% of all Americans, it sounds a little bit less scary, right? It's, it is a shift, but it's not a huge number. So sometimes these headlines are designed to make it appear that these shifts are much bigger than they are, whereas there's always been a lot of Americans who don't drink. And what I think we're seeing is that the next generation is going to have a different relationship to alcohol. That's true of every generation.
Yeah.
But we don't really know what that means yet. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. And I'm a believer that, they're going to partially revert to the mean. So we're going to see them drink a little bit more as they get older, but it's, they may be a little bit different. And the beverage alcohol industry is going to have to adapt to that over time.
I'd love to see that behavior that when they're 30, they're going to be right back on par. I'd love to see that compared with other behaviors, because it seems that lots of things are happening later. Kids don't get their license until they're 20. They don't leave the home until they're 25. They don't, all very different. So I'm in my mid 40s, and this is all very different from my behavior. There was, I'm a pretty honest guy. There was underage drinking. I was out of the house when I was 17. I had the license the day I'm 60. There was a bit more of an independence. Things just happening earlier, and that's across my generation, I think. So I'd love to see it, compared to other behaviors too. Drinking's just one of them.
Yeah, I love that you raised that, because it's not like, they're just acting different on this one dimension. Yeah, I mean, they're a different generation. They're going to engage in different stuff. They didn't drink in high school. They've come up in an age of social media where somebody's videoing you at all times. There's a lot of different pieces that play into this, and I think we got to, see how it develops. But, one thing that is clear is beer is going to have to understand that. It's going to have to evolve. It's going to have to fight against some of the trends that, right now you can get anything in the world delivered to your house in, not that long, with the magic phone that can also stream stuff to your TV and do all these things. And so I do think we see a generation where, particularly for on-premise, we're going to have to fight to give them reasons to come out, because they're so used to, well, I can just sit here and I can get everything that I would. And that's not true, though. I think we know, as people who love bars and love going out and love being social, that there is something that's being lost. And I think we got to find better ways of connecting with that next generation and telling them that and giving them that story.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioning just that we can kind of have everything from this central hub at home. Just a side story. Back in the 90s, mid 90s, one of my favorite bands on earth, I'll admit it, U2, just absolutely love U2. I read this interview with Bono at the time, and they were talking about this very thing. Bono said, what we're hearing from our corporate overlords, or whatever he said, was that a time will come where almost everything we consume comes from a central hub. We will, and he didn't know how to describe what that was, but he basically said, from your home, you will consume all of your media, you'll get things delivered to you. Like, they kind of knew this back in the 90s, just randomly. And I just think back to that, like, man, they did know this. It took a while, but it sure did happen. And the behaviors have dramatically changed. COVID obviously sped some of that up, but I don't even get upset that my customers come out less, because I do the exact same thing. I eat out less, I drink out less, so I can't blame anybody. It's just part of the change,
Yeah, and I think in framing the problem, and that's one part of the problem, right? We've talked about some others. There's economic, there's different behavior changes in beverage alcohol, but identifying that too, hopefully it will lead people to think about some creative solutions, because we're not the only industry facing this. So,
right.
Movie theaters have gone through the same thing. And there's lots of other kind of the same, you got to go out to get entertainment that I think are going to be facing these similar challenges. And so hopefully we can look to some of those places as well for solutions as we think about how do we appeal, how do we show our value proposition and convince people that it's worth getting off the couch, paying a little bit of money and coming into a bar, coming into a brewery and spending some money to socialize and enjoy yourself there.
I love that idea. Instead of just, often I'll just say, well, everything's cyclical, but waiting around for the cycle to change is probably not the solution. So
yeah, and you never know when something's a cycle and when it's just a long-term trend. So that's where forecasting's hard. We can see where the curve's gone. We can see where it's gone before. I was actually just looking at this for overall beer consumption. We're getting to a place kind of where we were in the 1950s where beer consumption turned back up, but are we going to hit that cycle again? Or are we just going to keep going down? I don't know.
Sure. All right. Well, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the bright spots, and we're going to talk about the growth and what Bart thinks breweries are doing and can do to experience that side of the spectrum. Hang in there. We'll be right back.
The leader in affordable, high-quality kegerators is here. Introducing Komos, the kegerator designed with serious beer drinkers in mind. It features an all-stainless steel draft tower, a major upgrade over traditional chrome-plated brass towers, and Komos keeps your new tower cold with their air-cooled tower fan, wrapping your beer lines in frigid coolness. Your beer is poured from innovative forward-sealing faucets that don't leak, so they stay cleaner for longer. Dual gas inlets on the rear of the fridge allow you to run both CO2 and nitrogen gas. Serve your beer with CO2, serve your kegged wine, or even cocktails with nitrogen. The digital temperature display has the largest range available, allowing you to use the Komos Kegerator for fermentation if you need to. And now Komos Kegerators ship with duo-tight draft fittings for that click-to-connect assembly we've all dreamed of. Buy direct from KomosDraft.com and receive free shipping on your order. That's KOMOS Draft.com.
Welcome back to the session. Thanks for hanging out with us. I appreciate it very much. Hey, don't forget about a great brewery, a friend of mine, a sponsor of this show who's been with us for a long time, 21st Amendment. You can go to 21st-amendment.com and check them out. Always putting out great beer, always doing wonderful things for the industry and supporting this show. So thanks to 21st Amendment. Go check them out. All right, Bart. So I had said before the break that I wanted to talk about some of the positive side of this. And I kind of, I want to set that up a little bit by saying that, like I said, about 50% of the breweries I know and that I talk to are growing and some aren't. Some are actually growing exponentially. I've really seen some brewery expansions that I would have expected to happen 10 years ago and not now. And you made some commentary about your mid-year report and what you think that reflects. And I think a lot of it has to do with identifying with a brand and what breweries really do to capture our hearts still, is what I would say. What do you think about all that?
Yeah. I think there's still a lot of opportunity in the market, right? I mean, we can point to a million markets, outside of beer where, the market itself isn't growing that much. We're not buying more of X product, but that there's an individual company that, because of their marketing, their branding, their product, their connection to their customers, is still finding success. And, I think that's the future for craft as well, where, maybe we're not going to grow 10% again, but we are going to see companies who are doing something new, who are doing something different, who are giving people what they want. And, to kind of look at this big picture, I mean, the amount of money spent on craft beer still went up last year, even in a down year for volume. So customers are still willing to take their hard-earned money out of their wallet and spend it on something they care about. And in a world with, lots of breweries, lots of competition, that doesn't mean it means that everyone can't win, but that some people will. And we're going to see breweries who give people a reason to connect with them, to buy their products, I think still succeed. And some of them are going to still succeed at high levels.
So one way I could interpret that, and I don't think it's the only way at all, is that then the market is saturated or oversaturated. And that's a warning that people have been saying for years and years. But is it really that now it's so saturated that I'm only going to stick to my favorite, or is it something different?
Yeah, well, saturated doesn't mean, that people aren't willing to try something new, right? It means that, that we have kind of enough supply and demand are in balance. And I would, I always try to use the word mature more than the saturated. Okay. We're a mature market. But, when supply and demand are in balance, you can do two things. One, again, you can outcompete somebody. So you can say hey, here's a reason to pick my beer over theirs. Yeah. Or you can go out and you can grow demand. You can do something new and different. And I think the breweries that are really succeeding out there are doing a combination, right? They're both winning in the marketplace. They're just doing a little bit better, but they're also appealing to somebody new by location, by beer brand quality or style, by, the marketing and branding, how it differentiates, speaking to a new clientele, giving people a new reason to buy their beer. So, you can have a saturated market and you can still have people who are going to grow and win. And I think the breweries that have taken that to heart and kind of understand this isn't going to grow by itself. We have to be clear about who we are. We have to be clear about what we stand for. We've got to match that with our go-to-market strategy. So where are we selling our beer? Does that match who we stand for and the places that the people we want to attract are going to be? Those are the ones who still have opportunity to succeed. And, if you're just relying on the fact that you're good local beer, there's a lot of good local beer out there. It's going to be harder to stand out. And so it's got to have that kind of next level business sense, branding, all that stuff wrapped into one.
Sure. And that kind of, that's the commentary I get too. that they almost the economics that we're discussing and the quality of beer are almost butt heads. I would say, and I think consumers would agree, we're in the golden age of quality. It's now become harder to find a bad beer or even a mediocre beer than it is to find a good beer. The talk about maturity, the skill now involved in brewing and that brewers has grown astronomically, right? So we're seeing this sort of, maybe decline in sales, but I would say a huge jump in quality.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we can hold those things at the same time and say they can both be true and maybe even related, right? When there is such a competitive marketplace, you need every differentiator possible. And the bad beer is going to get driven out of existence.
Right.
I know talking to some people, they don't think it's maybe happening fast enough. But, the customers, when they have limited dollars to spend and they've got lots of choices, over time are going to gravitate to what they like. And that's going to be a mixture of quality. It's going to be a mixture of branding. It's going to be a mixture of a lot of stuff. But I agree with you. I think we can both say that it's a tougher time for breweries because of cost size rising, because of competition. And it's probably the best time to be a beer drinker ever. Yeah. Or at least, beverage alcohol drinker. We have seen, I think, variety and selection have gone down a little bit, but there's so many great choices. There's so many options. Yeah. 85% plus of Americans live within 10 miles of a brewery. If you're in a big metro area, like the Bay Area, you're going to have a plethora of options, and most of them are going to be amazing. And so that can be true at the same time that all of those options mean extra competition for the breweries. So it's not necessarily the best time ever to be a brewery business, but it is probably one of the best times ever to be a beer drinker. Yeah. I want to give just an example just because I think that they encompass everything that you're talking about, where it's quality, it's the way they identify their brand, it's the branding specifically. And everything I'm going to say is also subjective, right? But Altamont Brewing Company out here in the East Bay, the deep East Bay, I buy their beer every week. It's one of my favorites. We sell a lot here at the Hop Grenade too. Not a sponsor, just giving a great example. But their beer is excellent. It's just every batch they make, every variety to me is excellent. Their branding is gorgeous. The people are fantastic. The tap room is one of the nicest, coolest modern tap rooms I've ever seen. It's the whole package, and they're growing exponentially. So even though everything I said is subjective to what I think of as quality, it's clearly resonating with others as well. And I was talking to them about it. Why you guys? And it really is. It's everything. It's the perfect storm. They've really made a lot of good decisions and put it all together into a package that resonates with people. Yeah, that's impressive. But also, sometimes I think we can oversell too how much you need to be a genius in all these areas. And okay. I remember I don't remember if it's Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett, but one of them said something like, how were you successful for so long? And they were like, we just didn't do anything stupid. Right. So I think breweries can also take heart in. You don't have to get all this right, but make sure you're not doing anything stupid, right? You're not letting your brand get stale. You're not selling beer where you shouldn't be selling beer. You're not stopping your listening to your customers and keeping your beers relevant in the marketplace. So sure. Maybe to make it a little bit kind of easier and more positive for breweries. Yeah, it's a whole bunch of decisions, and you don't have to nail them all, but you just got to you got to be thinking about them all. You got to be interacting, you got to be updating, you got to be modernizing. And sometimes that's just about not doing anything stupid as much as it is, really purely excelling in everything. Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. Okay, so I want to talk about something you mentioned earlier too, and that is that, some brewers contracted to a smaller market and saw success in that. That's what I see locally too, is strong local brands. At the same time, when COVID hit, one of the things that helped the more mature and smarter breweries that I know is that they had multiple sales channels. So when COVID hit, if 90% of your sales happened over the counter, you were in real trouble. In fact, you might not have made it at all. Whereas breweries who had both, Russian River is an example, over the counter, strong distribution, at least in the state of California and certainly the Bay Area, I don't know, they had multiple sales channels is the point. So what do you think about that? There is this strength in the local market and the local brand to find a solid footing, but do you think you still have to diversify as much as you used to? I mean, there's pros and cons of both. So, I think you got to think about what you can do well And I would argue, what Russian River has done so well is not necessarily diversify their brand, channels, but they've just built an incredibly strong brand. So
Right.
when they needed to rapidly shift those channels, they were able to do so. Right? People wanted to pull Russian River, and so they could return that capacity into a new channel very rapidly because of that overall brand that they've built. That people want the beer, and they want to be able to get it no matter how they can get it. For a typical brewery, I mean, I would ask them, when I was talking to a brewer, I would ask them, what do you think you do well? What do you think resonates? And what do you make money at too? Sometimes I think brewers think they're going to go into distribution, and distribution's a lot of not making a lot of money as you scale up. So what purpose is that serving in your business? Is it actually helping then drive people back to your tap room, which is your primary thing? Is it helping you, test a new market that you're thinking about going into? So there's a lot of advantages in going into distribution and having that diversification. If that's part of your plan, if that's part of your strategy, if the distribution that you're going into resonates with your customer base. But I think for a lot of breweries that go in deep, go in local, selling more beer over the bar where you got a better margin, really connecting with your local market where your brand's more likely to resonate, where people are more likely to know your story, to have all those things that are real advantages today, is probably going to be the better choice for most breweries, particularly as distribution contracts, as we see retailers simplify, and as distributors look to pick up fewer brands.
Sure. And I don't want to jinx us, but I would assume that statistically, the chances that we have another pandemic in the very near future that does the same as COVID are probably pretty low. So it's not.
Yeah.
So it's a gamble worth making, and not worrying about this only having a local market.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can, try to take lessons from COVID, but if it never, happens again in 200 years, how much does that really matter? And again, I'd like to believe that if you really have a strong enough local brand, even if you're only in your neighborhood, the people are going to find ways to want to connect with that brand, even if your tap room's shut again. And, we saw that from some brewers, right? They were just, selling 4-packs, out of a window, a drive-through window, or, they were finding other ways to get their beer out there, or people were crashing their websites because they wanted to buy merch during COVID to make sure they stayed open.
Sure. All right. Another thing people ask me, consumers ask me is, would I open a brewery right now? And my answer is always absolutely not. But my experience is different. The numbers show that there are still more openings than closings, right? And we're just under 10,000 breweries. So clearly the numbers show that despite maybe a very competitive market, there's room to open a new brewery. Would you agree with that statistically?
Yes, though I would immediately caveat it with what's your idea? What's this, all of those things.
Yeah.
Are there places where if you build in those answers, I would say I would not open a brewery? Yes, right? There are places where it's going to be very difficult to open up and stand out from a crowded field that's already very crowded.
Yeah.
Also, there's plenty of towns in the United States that have a population to support a brewery, don't have a brewery, that you're going in with a limited model that, is designed to serve that surrounding area. Can you be successful? Yeah. So the brewery question is one I find fascinating because people really fixate on it and they think about it.
Yeah.
And they think about it as a national question where it's really a whole bunch of very local questions. Can this neighborhood, can this town take a new brewery?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe yes or no. And it's the kind of aggregation of all of those local questions that really leads to the brewery number. And I do think we're going to be at a point, maybe it's here in 24 when we get the final data where we see that opening and closing either in balance or closing to actually slightly higher.
Okay.
We're close there. But I will guarantee there will be states where openings will still outpace closings. There will be a town that a brewery will go into that's never had a brewery before. So this ends up really being a highly localized question where are there cities where I guarantee this year there'll be states and cities where closings outnumber openings.
Sure.
Because there are places that can't take that one more brewery. Or if they can, and that brewery goes in and it does something super well, it's going to suck those sales from everybody else. And so one of those other breweries maybe going to go out of business.
Right. Just part of the economy.
Yeah. And, the reframe here I always like is just to get people thinking about restaurants. Nobody expects restaurants to open endlessly and not close.
Yeah.
Right? We all know what that business looks like, that the total amount of food that we are eating is not going up or down a huge amount. Maybe it does shift a little bit how much we go out versus buy at the grocery store. But when a new restaurant opens, it's going to take from that total market, and it's going to be in balance with some other restaurant closing. And we kind of expect that as part of the life cycle. And for these hospitality focused breweries, that's probably more the situation that it's going to look like going forward.
But Bart, we're different. This can't happen to us. We're not like the others.
We are still different. We are still special. For example, our closing rate's still shockingly low. I mean, we can see it go up, but the number of breweries that close this year will still be shockingly low relative to the doom and gloom narrative that we get, which shows how successful we are, which shows the connection to the brands that local customers have, which, and I do think we have some advantages, around how people drink beer has changed and around the margins that exist in a tap room or a brew pub. But at the end of the day, right, the laws of economics are still going to matter. Sure.
That makes sense. All right. Kind of a crystal ball question. And I think it kind of, because we've talked so much about local, and I'm going to go back to that. Are the days of growing into the large regional brewery over? 10 years ago, that was almost the goal of so many breweries, right? And a few succeeded. Do you see that really waning, that it's not going to happen?
Yeah, I think waning is a better word than over, right? We're still going to see people who, because they're, and they have the whole plan, they're well funded and they're trying to grow here and they're in the right place that doesn't have one of these. And so they can do it. I look at a brewery like New Trail out of Pennsylvania that, is less than a decade old and has grown to regional status and is still growing like crazy and, very successful. And, they're a part of Pennsylvania that there wasn't really a brewery like them before. They really nailed it with, their IPA, which is their kind of lead product. And so they've been able to do this, but those stories are going to get rarer and rarer. Most breweries that are open are going to, A, be designed to be locally focused and B, have to stay locally focused because, when they go out and they try to get bigger, they're going to realize there's lots of bigger players that are already in that next adjacent space. And so it's tough to move. Okay.
Since you mentioned IPA, can we talk beer styles for a sec? You have some stats on it?
I'd love to.
IPA is still the king of all, I assume?
IPA is still the king. And, part of that's that IPA has changed. If we were talking about IPA 10 years ago, we'd be talking about, a clear West Coast IPA. Today we're talking about, hazy Imperial double IPAs and kind of everything that IPA has become. But yeah, one of the most interesting things of beer styles, I'll segue, somewhere I was hoping we were going to get anyway, which is that we're seeing growth at both ends of the market. So the things that are growing right now are double Imperial IPA and then lighter, lower ABV styles plus non-alc, which non-alc's really driven by non-alc IPA when you look at the kind of sub-style data there. Okay. So really interesting kind of like hollowing of the middle and growth at both ends of the market, which we've seen our consumer data for years as well, that consumers say they're more interested in high ABV and low ABV. And those are the same customers. They're just, really segmenting more and more by occasion, which has been fascinating to watch.
Interesting. Yeah. And, what brewers talk about and what I see them doing is lagers. Everyone's like, lagers are back. Finally, lagers. Is that true, or is that just a perception that we have?
Yeah, I always like to, kind of caveat things. So, for the average small brewer, I think lagers are growing. When you look at it more holistically, it's a little bit less clear. A lot of those are local lagers taking a spot from, more regional or nationally distributed lagers. So, you add, Boston Lager into the mix, for example, and the numbers don't look quite as good but I think for the local level, yeah, we're finally seeing lagers connect. We're seeing more people invest in those brands. We're seeing more people, I think, also do lagers at kind of more of the light lager branded space, right? It's a little bit less about the beer and differentiating the beer and more about, building a brand, which has long been what that American lager and light lager space has been about. So I think it's a slow burn. We're never going to get that huge pop of lagers that some people hope for. But yeah, there's a lot of innovation in lagers too that I'm super excited about. I'm sure you're seeing this, Italian pills, West Coast pills, some of the dry hop lager stuff that's going on that I think is kind of in craft's wheelhouse of checking that sessionability box, right? Just say consumers want that low ABV as well, right? But also giving the flavor that craft is known for, and then maybe helping craft brewers compete. Because one of the challenges of lager has always been you make lager and then you're competing against the big brewers who have such massive economies of scale that the price points are different. So you got to give customers a reason. Why are they picking your lager at, whatever dollar price point it is above a large brewer? And I think some of the style innovations we've seen within lager have allowed breweries to give customers a reason to make that choice.
Sure. I feel so basic right now because I'm the epitome of like all of your stats. Like to me, it's fascinating to hear that it's the two ends of the spectrum in styles that are the most popular: the double IPA and the low alc, and that's exactly what I drink. You rarely find me in the middle, mostly because I consider pale ale still like low alc. But it's either a lager or a pale ale, not an IPA, and a double IPA. I really kind of fit into those trends you're talking about. It's just interesting.
I think some of that is, people in general, I think, are thinking a little bit more intentionally about how they drink. So, rather than we talked about people drinking less, or people drinking less today. And, what I would say I have observed, and we're trying to capture, hundreds of millions of different people who have very different habits. But if I was to try to draw a theme to draw them together, I think people are thinking more intentionally about how they drink, right? So, maybe it is taking a few more nights off or substituting some non-alcs in there, but it's also knowing that like, hey, tonight's my night that I am going to go big and I'm going to go out. And so I'm going to have a couple of double IPAs tonight.
Right.
And I think that shows up in the styles that people are just really connecting product and occasion. And I think that's a lesson to brewers too, of thinking about how you market brand. It's no coincidence that the ABV is printed really big on some of those double IPAs that are growing really fast right now. They're letting customers know exactly what they're getting and helping guide them to that choice, because that's how customers are thinking. What's tonight? What's the ABV or style that matches that? And then they're going out and buying it.
Yeah. And to me, that's kind of cyclical too. When I started in the industry, the first question everyone asked at the bar was, what's the ABV? Then in about the middle of my career, the first question everybody asked was how many IBUs. That became a thing. Then shortly after that, it became, is it hazy or clear? What's your haziest beer? And this is all just, experience from right over my bar top. Now it has come back to asking about the ABV. And I think that does have a lot to do with economics. I know what you said. It has to do with, is this my big night out? But I also think it really, and that's what it was in the beginning of my career. It was economics then, and I think it's kind of back to economics now.
Yeah, people doing beer math where they're thinking about, where does my dollar carry? And I also think that's some of the appeal of double IPAs, especially for kind of younger legal drinking age people who spend less money on beverage alcohol, but consume plenty.
Yeah.
I think they're thinking about, where does bang for buck go? And sometimes that double IPA is a great part of that equation, along with the flavor and the brand and all the other stuff they're looking for.
Sure. All right, here's a semi-random one. 16-ounce cans. To me, 16, at least in my region, I'm assuming it's nationwide, but maybe that's a big assumption. They're so ubiquitous now. And again, 10 years ago, they absolutely were not. How does the 16-ounce can and the rise of that being the primary format that people are selling beer to go, how does that relate to economics, do you think?
That's a great question. It is regional. So you see huge variations in the share of 16 ounce. So the highest share is actually in the Northeast, 16 ounce cans dominate. You could go to Vermont, it's hard to find a 12 ounce can.
Interesting.
I don't have a great answer for that, other than I do think that, can size can also meet with style. 19.2 has become synonymous with the double IPA, for example, and a lot of that's sold through convenience. Maybe that's something where consumers, when they see a 16 ounce, think they're getting a little bit better of a deal, even though, often, they're sold in 4-packs as opposed to 6-packs. So,
right.
I don't have a great answer for that, other than I think these things kind of, consumers have expectations about what they're going to get. And, we do see clusters where 16 ounce cans become the thing that's how customers buy their craft beer. And that's how they consume it. That's how they think about their occasions. And so I think you get some kind of critical, cluster effects where if everybody's doing it, that's what customers are looking for. That's what they expect. And so it's hard for them then to envision, the 12 ounce cans. And I find myself doing that as well, where it's, certain beers I expect to be in kind of certain can sizes. And right. I look for that.
Kind of a critical mass, like you said. And I also think convenience is a thing. I mean, we now just put out the 4-pack holders. It is our primary to-go method. People just fill a 4-pack. That's what they do. It used to be, right? Like my whole life, you go and buy a 6-pack. It's on a T-shirt almost. Give me a 6-pack. It was so popular, and now it's I got to go get my 4-pack.
I think that was it was a differentiator at one point. At one point it was really that's what made you different. Cans the same way. Cans used to be the thing that made you different because everybody was in bottles, and I do wonder if that's one that will cycle or if it's here to stay. I mean, we've seen the can share just, explode over the time period I've been at the BA, and so far it hasn't turned back. But I do wonder over time if this will change. Somebody had ordered a beer when I was out with some friends the other day in a bottle, and everybody kind of looked around and was like, "Oh, it's a bottle. That's great!" And I wonder if we're going to get that. Maybe the next generation will come around to like, "Ooh, it's in a bottle. It's different. It's special," and we'll see that kind of cycle back.
Oh, so Russian River will tell you exactly that. I've asked him, and they've started to do a little bit in cans now, but I think that's even mostly just straight out of the brewery. But he said, "Oh, I stay bottles now because I stand out on the shelf." It's not his only reason, but he's like, "Look, from a marketing perspective, I look fantastic on the shelf right now," and I think some people they really go for that. It is different, which is so funny because again, 10 years ago, his bottle was just a different shape than the other bottles on the shelf.
Yeah. These things certainly go in cycles, so it'll be interesting to watch. And I wish I could predict kind of what it'll look like in 10 years, but it'll be something different. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. All right, last question. I'll let you go, Bart, but I do want to bring it back to kind of the local theme that we were talking about. And certainly in your report, you had said, if you can resonate with your customers in that way and in your branding. But I wanted to ask, it was another interview I did who wanted me to ask you, are you really capturing enough data from these tiny local breweries? He was concerned that there's a little too much doom and gloom because his tap room's doing great and so is his friend down the road and so on and so forth. So are you truly able to capture the micro markets?
Yeah, I mean, we do a better job on this on our annual survey than we do on our mid-year. I will fully admit.
Okay.
But yeah, we get 3,000 data points on that. So we're getting breweries of all size. 75% of the breweries in the country are 1,000 barrels or less, and we're kind of the one data source that does capture those. Both we do that in our survey work, and we also try to work with partners like we worked with Arrive Point of Sale in the past to get some aggregated taproom data. And I would say that does make our numbers more positive. If you listen to my mid-year, I'm pretty clear, like our numbers are better than a lot of the doom and gloom in say trade press, which is only looking at scan and that kind of wider distribution, and the taproom piece is a part of that.
Okay.
I also would say that, the taproom numbers aren't as good as they used to be. I mean, we've tracked those for a while, and they used to be that, distribution was down, but that was still strongly positive. And one of the flips we saw this year was that taproom, there's variation. There's lots of people who are growing still in parts of the country where that's still very successful. But as a whole, that taproom piece isn't growing the same way that it once was. So I do talk to lots of people who have success stories who are growing. I was in several tap rooms in last week that, things are great, that they're seeing sales go up. But I equally talk to plenty of brewers where the tap room's not pulling like it once was, that they're having to think of new stuff. They're trying more things to drive traffic, but they're also looking at distribution more to try to balance that out. So I do think we're capturing a lot of that data. If you're a brewer who's listening, I urge you to fill out our survey so we can get even more of it. I can never have too much data. And we also, one other piece is we fill in a lot of ours with state data. So we go through those state data reports, and that gives us a lot of the smaller brewers and allows us to track them.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I figured you were. I said, hey man, don't count out my boy Bart. He's capturing he's not going to give you some bullshit. So
yeah, we're trying to look at the market as many ways as possible, and we're very cognizant too that the vast majority of our members are brew pubs and tap rooms, and so if we're not capturing that piece of the market, we're not putting out data that's relevant to their business. So
absolutely.
I'm very hyper focused on making sure we're giving insights that are applicable, whether you're Sierra Nevada or you're the local brew pub that just opened up and makes a couple hundred barrels.
Sure. All right, Bart. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time and for doing what you do. It's fascinating to me, and I'm just really glad that you guys are there doing it. I look forward to your reports every year.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me on.
You got it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bart Watson. He's from the Brewers Association. You can check out his reports there. If you're not a member of the BA, you should be, because this is the stuff that it pays for, and including a million other things that the BA does. I'm fortunate enough to work closely with everybody over there at the BA at events and all year long, and it's just a great organization. So support your local Brewers Association. All right, Bart, thank you again. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time here on The Session. Take care of yourselves and your beer. The Session is a production of the Brewing Network and brought to you by More Beer. Check them out at morebeer.com. Find more content and live video of this show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Brewing Network. For sponsorship opportunities and information, please reach out to advertising@thebrewingnetwork.com. To reach our hosts, contact feedback@thebrewingnetwork.com.